Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today we're going to unlock two of the most fundamental building blocks of any program, variables and data types. By the end of this session, you'll understand how Java stores data, how to choose the right type for your needs, and you'll be writing your first variable declarations in no time. Okay, so let's get started. What is a variable? Think of a variable as a labeled box in your computer's memory. Okay, everything in your computer is saved at a certain memory, right? So you give it a name, you give your variable a name, you decide what kind of items can go inside, right? And then you can store, retrieve, and modify those items whenever you like. So the key idea behind a variable is that a variable's name is your handle to that memory location where your data is actually stored. And the analogy would be like naming a folder on your system or it's on your desktop so you can find your files later. Okay, so these are the primitive data types, and these are some of the reference data types, and we're going to be only discussing few of them, not all, because you're not going to be using all of them in your program. Okay, so Java is a strongly typed language. What it means is that every variable that you want, it must declare what type of data it holds. So for example, let's say you want to store your age in your program, so you'll have to specify that, okay, my age would be a number, right? Because let's say you are 20 years old, so it's a number that you have to store in your memory. So that number would be an integer and you'll use the int data type. So that's what it means that Java is a strongly typed language. You have to specify what type of data your variable is going to hold, and this lets the compiler catch early errors, I would say, or and helps the JVM optimize your code. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so first thing that you need to remember is that your variables should have a unique name, and second, you should not just use random variable names. Okay, you should use the names that are meaningful to you and for others that are going to read your code. Okay, so let's say you have to store your age. The first thing would be to declare your variable. And how you do that, you specify by typing the type of that variable. Okay, so your age would be a number, and in Java, the number is stored with this int variable, which is short for integer. And we'll name this variable age. Now you put a equal sign, okay, and then you type your age and then put a semicolon. Okay, so this is how you declare a variable in Java. Okay, now let's print it. We all know how to print that. So let's print our age, and what do you think will be the output? Okay, just make a guess. I'm going to run this program now. So you see the output is 20. Okay, you might be confused that, okay, we are printing age, and why did it not print age, but it printed 20? And this might arise in your mind if you're new to programming, right? So what it means is that age has a value of 20. Okay, so when you print age, okay, the name of your variable, it actually gives the value that it holds and not the name itself. Okay, so that's why when we print age, it gives us back this 20, the value. So if I change this to 25, our output will also change, and now it is 25. Okay, now let's discuss another one. Let's say you want to store a decimal value. Okay, let's say you want to store your salary or something. So you'll say double, and let's call it salary, and let's say it is something 245 dot something like this. Okay, and let's print your salary. So you see, you got decimal value. The one thing that you should remember is that you cannot store a decimal value in integer, but you can do the vice versa. So for example, let's say if I have to store value without a decimal in double, it would work. So if I do this, you see it gives me 2455, but it puts a 0 at the end because now it is a double value, even though we assigned an integer, but it converts this integer into a decimal value. And when a decimal value doesn't have a actual decimal part, it's 0. So that's why we have the value as 2455.0. Okay, so if I try to put a decimal here, you see it gives us an error and it says that, okay, required type is int provided double. Okay, so that means you cannot store double value inside an integer variable, but you can do vice versa. Okay, now another thing that, let's say let's declare it before int and assign it a value like this, and let's call this variable salary2. And as I mentioned previously, that you cannot declare a variable again, that your variable has to be unique, so you cannot redeclare your variable again, because it says that it already exists, already defined in the scope, right? So you have to name it something else. Okay, now let's say you assign the value of salary to it. Okay, now it gives us an error, obviously, because the salary is of type double and we are trying to assign it to a variable of type int. Okay, so let's read the error. It says required type int, but the provided is double. Now what you can do is, let's say you want the integer part, okay, because that's the point of using an integer, right? You do not need the decimal parts. What you can do is you can convert this into integer by putting brackets like this before your variable, and just type the data type that you want. So int can only store int, right? So you type int inside these parentheses before your variable that you're assigning the value from, sorry. So if I run this now, and first of all age is not there, so it should be salary2. Let's comment this out. So any guesses what this salary2 will be? It will be 2455. You see, and now it doesn't have a decimal part because it is int and it doesn't have a decimal part. Okay, now let's talk about another variable. Let's say you want to store your grade. Okay, so this is where a character comes in. It is pronounced as char. Okay, and some people also pronounce it as char, so totally depends upon people, I guess. Okay, so let's name this variable grade and let's store your grade. Okay, so one thing that you have to note about this char or char or character is that it can only store up to one character. Okay, you cannot have multiple characters in here. Okay, that will make it a string. Okay, I'll cover the string later in the video. Okay, now if I have to print this, so what I'll do is I'll just do grade and we'll print the grade here, and it prints A for us, right? You can change this to B and it will print B, but you cannot have multiple characters. Okay, you can only have one character. Now the other important variable is boolean. Boolean means true or false. Okay, it can either have a value as 0 or 1, not integer but a true or false value. So let's say is student. Okay, so this is the type of naming that we usually use for boolean. We followed by some verb. Okay, so we say is a student, so that means if you are a student or not. So we'll say yes, you are a student, so we'll assign true. Okay, you see, without quotes you have to assign the value. Cannot be a string or character, right? Cannot be like this. It has to be a boolean type, and boolean you just write true or false for false. Okay, so let's print is student and it will print false for us. You see, false. Okay, so that's how you store the boolean values. So we covered like 4 data types: the int, double, the char, and boolean. These are the ones that you're going to be using the most. And byte and short, you can see the size, so you can just like this, you can remember the number of values that it can hold, 2 raised to the power 8. Similarly, short is exactly the double of byte. Int, it will suffice most of your needs. Okay, if you have to store the any numbers that are longer than 2 raised to the power 32, you can use long. And float is exactly the half of double. Character can store only 1 character, and boolean can only store 1 bit, either 0 or 1, right? Let's talk about strings now. So string is a reference data type, and it means that in primitive it means it directly gives you a value, right? But in reference, what it says that, okay, I am giving you a memory location and your data exists there. Okay, it's fine if you do not understand that. We'll cover this in the later videos, okay, where your variables are stored, the primitive ones, and where your reference data types are stored. So in order to declare a variable, a string variable, you have to type string, and then let's say you want to name your variable name, and let's type a name here. Let's call Alice. Okay, now one thing to note here is that you see double here, it has lowercase d, then int has lowercase I, same for char, same for boolean, but for string we have a capital S. Okay, so this is something they need to remember. Now we have stored the name Alice, and let's print it out, and we'll say name, and let's run it, and the output is Alice. Okay, now let's print a statement that will use all of these variables that we have defined. Okay, so we'll say Alice, and we'll say is, and we'll say the age, and we do not have the age, but let's define age here, and we'll say 25. Alice is 25 years old and earns, I will say salary per month. Okay, let's run it, and you see Alice is I just need to give a space here, and let's run it again, and it says Alice is 25 years old and earns 2455.44 per month. So we define the salary here. Okay, so this is how you can use the variables in Java. Okay, so before we move on, a quick question for everyone: why can't you store text in an int variable? Okay, we are storing the numbers only, but why can't you store a text here? Okay, the answer is because an int box or variable only understands numbers, okay, and not letters and words. So Java enforces this strictly to keep your programs bug free. Otherwise it would be catastrophic for your program. All right, that's essentials. That are the basic things that I needed to discuss in this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.